Nice to see so many folk here. I've been working on this lecture or this talk for a couple of weeks, and it's got lots of new stuff in it. So hopefully it's designed to elucidate things about our neighborhood in Peckham. It builds very much from the previous talks that we've had in our Peckham Heritage Regeneration Club, building on the Peter Guillory talk that happened last year, I guess, about the small 18th century houses. And it builds hugely on the fantastic work that Julie and Felicity have been doing down on the High Street. And yeah, it's on message for what we're all doing here with our Peckham Heritage Regeneration crew. It's sort of an unofficial parallel, I suppose, to the THI project, stuff that we've kind of put together in our studio alongside the excellent work that the council has been doing, including some of the buildings that massively overlap with the work that the council's trying to do, improving Peckham High Street and the fantastic Rye Lane. So we're mostly hanging around on the High Street and Rye Lane in this talk this evening, but we make a little detour down the street to Deptford High Street, which is another absolutely amazing South London High Street, which I commend to you all. And I've enjoyed, we've got a little project there for the Lobo family. And I've really enjoyed spending a lot of time in Deptford these last couple of years, pushing this project along and learning about the architecture of Deptford. And then we come back to Peckham at the end of the talk. So I should dive into it now because there's lots of stuff I want to talk about. And we're going to hop around a few other places along the way. So do I need to press the projector button on the PowerPoint? Am I sharing the screen? I'm probably not sharing the screen yet. Now I think I am. And then I probably press the projector button on this thing, which let me see if I can find.
That looks fine, Benny.
Okay, does that fill the screen or do I need to make it bigger still?
You could make it bigger.
Okay, then I go press this button, I think. Okay, well, while my computer is catching up with us, let's start the talk. We're starting here in this map of Peckham from the 1820s or 1830s. And we can see that our beloved home is clustered, the core of Peckham is where the High Street meets Rye Lane. And then there you can see the windy old High Street running west to east, and this kind of curious swelling as you come to that junction there, which must betoken a kind of gathering or a market kind of space, sort of opposite where the Peckham Arch is today. And it's been an area of great interest for the Peckham Society and us local architects and people interested in architecture history, because it's really the core of the neighborhood. And so the first of these 4 butchers shops that we're going to look at this evening is 62 Peckham High Street. Thankfully, because this butcher shop is in the very heart of old Peckham.
Penny, sorry, darling. Can we see whether you can get the slideshow going? Because so let's just take a moment and to see whether you can do that. And
okay.
I think you go to slideshow, don't you? And then there's
I've got another idea. Maybe okay. Yeah.
Isn't it slideshow along the top?
Tried pressing that button quite vigorously here, and it's just not doing. Let me try.
Does anyone have any other ideas, perhaps? And slideshow along the top. Have you tried that?
Yeah, I have. I'll try again though.
That looks better actually now.
I've made it full screen now.
I suppose that's if you can't get rid of the sidebar, that's okay. Oh, what about if you just do the cross on the sidebar? So if you start from the left, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's make it bigger still. Let's see if I can. Here. Okay. Well, let's not worry too much about this.
No, that's great. Thank you, Benny.
That looks fine. Yeah.
Okay, so well-documented site, 62 Peckham High Street. Here we can see the group of old timber frame houses built in the late 17th, early 18th century on the south side of the High Street. And of these group of 5 or 6 houses, 4 of them still remain, but this one on the far left was removed, we think, probably in the 1920s or 30s. So this is roughly what they looked like into the 1980s and 90s. And we can see these tall, rather slender timber frame structures rising up behind the gardens, the former gardens of these houses here. And so if we look back at this fabulous painting from the 1820s, we can see there were little gardens in the front. And even by the 1820s, one of the gardens had already been built over to create a little shop or a tea room or something like that, perhaps serving the cheerful canal workers who were in the timber yards on the opposite side of the street, where, of course, the Surrey branch or the Peckham branch of the Surrey Canal terminated. So these buildings are wonderfully treated in Peter Guillory's book, The Small House in 18th Century London. And for people with an interest in London's architecture history, I cannot praise this book too highly. It gets into something that most architecture histories kind of overlook. That is artisans' houses, housing for the middling and the working and the artisan classes. And they were typically timber frame buildings. Now, of course, London expanding massively in the 19th and 20th century, the vast majority of these houses were swept away, but some of them survive in places like Peckham and Deptford, places that haven't been so churned over in the same way that Westminster or Kensington and Chelsea, there would have been hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of these houses in the West End, but they were cleared away typically in the 19th and early 20th century. Some of them, though, survive in Peckham and survive in the East End too. These are timber frame houses. Now, all of you Londoners will be familiar with the mighty Staple Inn on High Holborn, which is one of the great examples of big timber frame architecture from the Elizabethan period surviving in London. And so this is happily one of the important early examples of the rise of the conservation movement in the 1880s and 1890s. These timber frame buildings were getting cut down left, right, and center up until basically almost now. I mean, of course, in our journey with the Peckham Heritage Regeneration Partnership, we've been trying to save these buildings. They're still very much under threat, but thankfully this is grade 1 listed and gives you an example of what they look like in the Tudor times. Well, here you can see a timber frame house dressed up in a kind of 18th century outfit, kind of dressing with this pretty Palladian window. And so these buildings are around, but they typically survive in the more peripheral parts of town, but they abounded. And so here's a view of old Bermondsey, where there were a great deal of these things, thankfully documented by photographers who realized this was the last of old London as these buildings were cut down in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Here's one of my sketches from around Peckham. And I've always been drawn to these buildings because of their picturesque qualities. The old clay tile roofs and the different kind of shapes and tumbly down chimneys, and they're just so picturesque. And so as a Peckham person, I've really been drawn to them. Here is the one that survives near Tate Modern on Hopton Street. And so that's an important survivor of these buildings in the north part of Southwark. What are the characteristics? Often this kind of slender shape, quite tall, statuesque roofs, clay tiles reflecting the vernacular materials of Surrey and Kent, this fabulous clay that surrounds us here. And so they were made with materials directly from the sites. If we flick back briefly to the old map of Peckham, we can see that the area, there's a massive brickfield basically where the Morrison's supermarket is today, where the car park is. Huge brickfield. You can see a pond typical of a brickfield where they've been pulling the clay out. And so as I'm going to show you in this little narrative, these buildings in Peckham are made from the materials of Peckham. And so clay tiled roofs, often brick faced, but timber framed on the inside. One of the things that's drawn me to this work since I was a youth architecture student was the kind of handcrafted element of it. And here's a sketch that I made on a cycling tour in Germany about a decade ago. And I was intrigued by the scale, the human scale of these buildings and the intricacy of how they were crafted, where the timber joiners' work met the glazers' work, met the bricklayers' work, and the tile man's work. I love the kind of handcrafted, integrated, and of course, kind of seductive, picturesque nature of these buildings. Here's a group in Warwick, an old hospital that kind of gloms onto the city gate that I sketched last summer. Here, some of the fabulous old timber frame houses in York. York and Warwick are kind of famous for these. And this is a watercolor that I did down the road in Hythe in Kent, where again, you can see these clay tiled roof buildings with the tall kind of Queen Anne windows, clay tiles draped over these fabulous ancient timber frames. So they're around, but what's so exciting is they're here in Peckham. And so here you can see a sketch that I've made from the Turkish supermarket on the top of Peckham Hill Street, looking at the group, is it 100 and 102 Peckham High Street, which have been so beautifully restored by Julie and the crew. And so we will be, us Peckham folk will be eternally grateful to you and Southwark and the HLF for making that happen. There's another amazing group down the road in Deptford, and this is Tanner's Hill, which is just at the south end of Deptford High Street on the opposite side of the Broadway. And you can see this super picturesque group with their tall, I mean, it could be an image from Holland, wouldn't you say? Some picturesque Dutch kind of place, but actually it's just down the street in Deptford. In this one, we can see these pan-tile roofs. That's another characteristic of this period, is the almost sort of clay bent around someone's knee or so, forming this lovely kind of pan-tile shape. And so I commend these to you, and a really stylish architecture firm that you can just make out made an art gallery in one of them, the great Dow Jones Architects. And amongst that group on Tanner's Hill is this fantastic butcher, which I hugely commend to you. It's the well-beloved butcher, apparently trading in Deptford for 200 years. I think they're closing down, so now's a good time to go. And but that's again this group of these timber frame houses that survive in Deptford. We'll come back to Deptford a bit later. So in April 2018, there was a very sad fire that burned off a good deal of the top part of 62 Peckham High Street. This was a photograph I took the following morning. The fire happened, I think, around 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. And it was an electrical fault and people not occupying the building perhaps as neatly as they should. And so thankfully the fire brigade, yay, London Fire Brigade, were on the scene really quickly. Because of course the fire station is just down the high street, you know, half a mile or so. And so the fire was put out. But as you can see, the roof of 62 was burned and a good deal of number 60 was damaged too. So these are the pictures that we took as soon as we managed to kind of get in with the group from Southwark to inspect the inside. I took a couple of photographs. And because of the intensity of the fire, the plaster all came off the walls. And so it reveals this really remarkable timber frame, which I think tells stories possibly about an earlier building that was on this site. And so over the course of the last couple of years, very much through the encouragement of Southwark, the owners of this building, the Sadiq family, have set about restoring 62 Peckham High Street. And I've been lucky to be working with them. This is the west wall where it abuts number 60. And so what we can see here is a handcrafted timber frame from like probably before the 18th century, I think. And I'm wondering if that strong A-shaped profile to this top wall hints at possibly another building that was on this site. Certainly some of those angled timbers have notches cut in them, suggesting they were part of an earlier frame. So if this isn't actually earlier, certainly some of the timber elements come from another building, or dare I even imagine a ship from the Deptford dockyards just down the road. This photograph here shows it, how fierce the fire was. And we can also see the central plan chimney stack, which on the right-hand side, which was one of the characteristics of these buildings, which were built on the threshold of town and country. So using rural kind of building techniques, and as the front, as you can see from this elevation we drew, is quite symmetrical and Palladian. So it borrows themes from urban architecture, but is really built in the way they build in the countryside, using the traditional, what we call vernacular building techniques that have been evolving since time immemorial, since the Roman times, I would suggest. So when the fire happened, we made this drawing here. We had been involved in looking at a planning application for 66 Peckham High Street. And so for the mighty Akbar Khan, that to make a little restaurant there, which never kind of happened. But when we were working on that a couple of years ago, we went up onto the roof to survey, make these drawings. And we jumped at the chance to survey 62. And this was ironically just about 6 or 8 weeks before the fire happened. So it was really, I think, significant to try to document and record this thing. We, of course, had no idea the building would burn, but such is the kind of nature of our architecture studio. We're crazy about historic buildings. And so we'll leap at a chance to elevate what is, of course, one of the legendary building or key buildings in Peckham's architecture history. There goes Hina in the foreground, me in my characteristic beret in the background, and a picture taken by my chum, Pete. So us folk in the Peckham Society got onto these buildings, well, we've had our eye on them for a long time. And this drawing here was done by my great chum and person who taught me a great deal about architecture and conservation, Stephen Robb, who was one of the leading lights in the Peckham Society, but moved to Scotland, where he comes from, and now is the chief inspector for Edinburgh and for Historic Scotland. But what he shows here is what the houses look like above the shops. And so this was a sketch that he made around the time we were campaigning to get these buildings listed. And because of the work, the Peter Guillory's book and the work from the Royal Commission of Historic Monuments, we managed to get one of these buildings listed. And so the great success there for the Peckham Society is if you can kind of list one of the buildings, then it makes it much more difficult for developers to kind of pare away the group, because one of them is a kind of protected ancient monument. And so that was one of our campaigns that we did in the first half of the 1990s that led to our big push to create a conservation area on Peckham High Street and Rye Lane, which we achieved in 2011, I think. So here Stephen did a drawing of what they looked like originally. So here we can see with the shop fronts, the shops removed from the front, the big kind of extensions. These extensions are about 6 or 8 meters long at least. And so with those pared away, you can see the quite elegant vertical proportion of these townhouses, quite slender in plan, but quite tall, beautifully proportioned, with this sort of genteel urban kind of front face. And then another big breakthrough happened in the late, I guess about 2010, when this drawing was discovered in Australia. And the back of the drawing said Peckham High Street or something like that. And so the owners of the drawing sent this, a beautiful reproduction of it, to the Southwark Local History Room, and it was immediately shared with us folk in the Peckham Society. And it was so exciting to see a very accurate depiction of this group of houses from the 1820s or so. I'm guessing 1820s, from the hats and the clothes of the riders in the foreground, who are of course drawn impossibly too small. But that's of course one of the characteristics of topographic drawing. A lot is the figures tend to be kind of small. So with that drawing in mind, we did a little design for how you probably ought to repair 62 Peckham High Street, and sent this to Julie and just about anybody who would be interested, and said, you know, here's the opportunity to restore this building properly based on this amazing, incredibly clear and beautifully drawn document from the early 19th century. So then following making this drawing, I set about finding the butchers basically. And I had learned that United Meat was based in Woolwich, just off Woolwich High Street. So a series of sunny afternoons, I made kind of weekly pilgrimages down there and saying, you need to talk to us. We've got an idea for you. It's not going to be hard to, by choosing the right materials for recladding, refacing this building, re-roofing this building, that we could make a journey towards a better result for Peckham, I think. So we did a little scheme, and how the other kind of important thing for the scheme is we thought that it was essential to occupy the upstairs, because I think the fact that it wasn't occupied upstairs led to the fairly parlous situation that eventually ended up with the fire. And so with a flat made upstairs, it would be inhabited. And of course, it's the best thing for historic buildings for them to be occupied. Here's a drawing from the English Heritage Report about Peckham that was produced to help encourage Southwark to designate the conservation area. And this is the north side of Peckham High Street. And so you can see these buildings were on both sides of the street. You can see the timber, the big clay tiled roofs. You can see the weatherboarding, again, a characteristic of vernacular rural architecture. And you can see that by the second half of the 19th century, there were shops lining the bottom of these buildings. And so working with the Sadiq brothers, we set about surveying the building really carefully and trying to interpret what we found there. And then working with the structural engineer, we found a place to basically introduce a steel frame to strengthen the inside of the building. And I kind of characteristically made a bit of a fuss about how significant the walls were, and how that rather than that somehow they should be shown in the final flat rather than covered over. And somehow that sunk in a little bit with the builders, sort of negotiating with the builders and the client, the Sadiq, mostly Kaz Sadiq. So here a little victory. We managed to get clay tile roofs on the Peckham High Street facing side of the roof. Although I wanted clay tiles on both sides. We've got these concrete tiles on the back, but well, not so many folk will see them unless you're got a keen eye from the little car park, but it's got the authentic old clay tiles on the front. So we had a jolly journey to the great D&T slate factors in Erith, just beyond Erith town center, where they had 75,000 clay tiles and found some really nice ridge tiles and diverse ones and all kinds of interesting stuff. If like me, you're into tiles, it's amazing discovery. And these days tiles are pretty hard to get your hands on. So we were really pleased to find as many as we needed. Here's the Merry Musketeers who are doing this project. Caesar on the left, who's a Bolivian, Kaz in the middle, who's Anglo-Pakistani, and then Jose on the right, who's Peruvian. And so Caesar, who's a fine carpenter, doesn't speak English terribly well. So it's been a great opportunity to work up my high school Spanish from my years growing up in my teenage years in the United States. And so here's some of the sketches we've been making, trying to look at some of the important historic features. And then this is a photograph taken a couple of months ago that shows this incredible interior with, you can see the steel frames carefully bracing the historic walls, which are kind of still there. I followed very much what we call SPAB, or Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings principle, to keep as much of the fabric of the historic building as possible and see if, to what degree it could be propped and integrated into a firm new structure. Unfortunately, I lost numerous significant battles along the way, not just the tiles on the back roof. Unfortunately, the central plan chimney was taken down in 3 stages, sort of behind my back. And I moaned each time I went to site about that. But I can understand hugely why, because it took out the better part of 2 square meters of plan area per floor. And so this is all serving Southwark's Section 215 notice to improve the outside of the building and strengthen the building and make it safe and fit into the conservation area better, which I think has been achieved. And so here, well, it's on its way, shall we say. Here's a picture I took a week or so ago showing the inside with the eastern wall preserved, a new staircase introduced that hopefully will give vitality to this flat idea that we have. And here we can see the western wall, which the folk have done, rather than, we've started repointing the brickwork, which I think is a significant step towards trying to make this a kind of internal feature, which I think will be interesting. I mean, I think it'll be interesting. We could have a debate after the talk of whether it should be preserved visually. I mean, it will be there, but I think I'm going to fight hard to try to bring as much of this fabric into the interior design of the building. So that's the latest on 62 Peckham High Street, trying to put back together carefully this fire damaged building. Julie and Claire, should I stop for questions now, or what do you think? Or keep going?
I think you should keep going, Benny, and have questions at the end.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so the next stop in our little tour of 4 butcher shops in South London heads down to Deptford High Street. And here we can see the cheerful market at Deptford, which is still really vital. I think it's two days a week, I think Tuesdays and Fridays, Saturdays, I guess. And we can see, this is the site, you can see the Kennedy's butcher shop in the middle of this photograph here. And what's, so this Kennedy's was a well-known chain of South London butchers, which sadly closed in 2007. And the butcher shops all were auctioned off or sold off very rapidly. But they were quite interesting spaces. Here's a remarkable picture from the early 1990s showing this site right in the middle of the market street, about halfway down from Deptford Broadway to the south, to the railway station on the north end and St. Paul's Church, right about in the middle, halfway down on the east side, the Greenwich side of Deptford High Street. And so these pictures were taken by the Royal Commission of Historic Monuments in the 1990s, recording old timber frame houses in Deptford. And they survived quite well in Deptford. There's more than, we've got 5 or 6 in Peckham. I think there's a good 8 or so in Deptford. Now, of course, Deptford High Street was lined with these buildings in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. And particularly sad is the loss, which I should be showing you pictures of the massive group that met the Thames as the High Street used to lead all the way to the Deptford dockyard, the Royal Dockyards. Sadly, with replanning in the post-war era, that whole end of the High Street was turned into modern housing estates. But there's some amazing pictures in Peter Guillory's book, which I recommend to you guys, The Small House in 18th Century London, that show what the extent of Deptford High Street back in the 18th and 19th centuries. And they survived basically until the post-war times, even into the 70s and 80s. There's that amazing episode of The Secret Lives of Our Streets. Some of you will be familiar with that. I think it was BBC4 series that looks at different high streets across the capital. And there's a great episode on YouTube on Deptford High Street, which I've watched 7 times. It's really, really good. There's these incredible characters, and it really tells the story of the journey from old Deptford to modern Deptford, basically. We got to know Kennedy's doing reopening and restoring in the interior of the grade 2 listed Kennedy's on the Walworth Road. And that was a joy. That one was well preserved on the inside. And it was a joy to turn it into a little pizza place. And here's the one in Peckham. There's a tiny bit of the tilework survives of this. It's on the east side of the high street next to Woolworths, or what used to be Woolworths on the right. Yeah, sad. They mostly went. Well, no, that's not true, actually. There are quite a few of them around. The one in Crystal Palace Wall, in the triangle up there, that one's been turned into an optician. It works beautifully with all the mirrors and the tile work. So there's a great survival of the Kennedys in Crystal Palace. The one survives in Walworth that we worked on. And the one survives next to the South London Art Gallery that's currently occupied by the artist Rakib Shaw. So they're around. Here's the one in Deptford, though, hasn't survived terribly well. Unfortunately, the shop front was had out shortly after it was bought by these butchers, and it looks pretty a little bit rough at the moment. And so we've been working on a scheme to revive it, which I really hope will happen one day. So here's some of my comrades in our studio climbing up into the upstairs where we found this incredible interior. And so one of the tragic and familiar things in doing work in the high streets of South London is often the stairs are removed to the upstairs. So the upstairs get kind of mothballed, and because the value of the shop is all in the shop floor on the ground level, and there's very little value upstairs. And so they typically take the stair out. And that's the case of, I would say, maybe 25% of the shops on the north end of Rye Lane are like that. But now they're beginning to come back, but it means you have to take quite some plan area off the shop in order to get a stair up there. And so with the ladder, we climbed up to find this remarkable interior from above the old butcher shop. And when we got up in this spectacularly cobweb infested kind of place, we discovered this huge pile of biscuit tins on the front elevation here. And they were beautiful tins with quite bright, lively, do I have another picture of them? Oh yeah, here they are, with quite lively labels on them. But when you touch them, they kind of disintegrated. They just sort of turned to dust. And so it seemed like this place hadn't been occupied for, I reckon, about 100 years when Kennedy's kind of came in. Turns out, with a bit of internet searching on the Lewisham local history page, these were the biscuits, the legendary Chiltonian biscuits. And so there was this marvelous interwar factory just down the road in Manor Park, just south part of Lewisham, that made the Chiltonian biscuit. So it was really exciting to find these biscuit tins, which I presume they sold at Kennedy's. And so that was one discovery there. Here you can see the site. It's, as I say, right in the middle on the east side of Deptford High Street. And more or less survived the war. There you can see a rocket strike just to the south of it. But sadly, the fine grain of the backlands of Deptford High Street was mostly cleared in the post-war era. But thankfully, the fine grain of the High Street itself survives, which is really good news. And here we can also see the characteristic thing you find in these places is the kind of palimpsest of different people's wallpapers and paint schemes over the years, different kind of distemper paints that were typical of from the 19th century. We can also see the handmade bricks and the lime mortar that held these buildings together. So what here is a thing that we like to do when we study these buildings is to kind of figure out a chronology of the different parts of the building. And one of the things that we found here is exactly what we found at 62 Peckham High Street, is that the first floor level was raised about 12 or 18 inches to make a taller shop. And at that point, we think the stair came out. I think it's almost certainly the same thing happens at 62 Peckham High Street, is when about 1900, when the butcher shop, the garden gets built over and a shop is introduced there. A steel is put through to support the upper part of the facade. You can see the steel in this drawing here. And then they because they introduced the steel, they take the floor level up to create much better headroom and to prioritize the shop over the house. And at that point, they removed the stair, and that was the last time anybody lived upstairs. So what we have here is the scheme that we've done to try to improve this property, which is to put back the clay tiled roof that's missing, to introduce dormers to create like hopefully reasonable bedrooms in the front, and to think out a kind of cheerful and historically appropriate shop front. Of course, we can't really, I think, change the level of the floor. One doesn't want to bring it down again. And so the windows will always look a bit truncated. And here are some pencil sketches that we made along the way towards getting planning consent from Lewisham Council for reviving this building. And then what I think is important for the work that we're doing in Peckham is that I think an interesting exchange for preserving the fronts of these buildings and the fabric and the frame of these buildings is to look at ways to make them bigger and more, make them into real usable flats, basically. In this case, by adding a conservatory at the back and creating a kind of jumbo dormer to make something make a decent bedroom. And so our approach to the back is much more modern, to create big kind of dormers to throw daylight into these old houses and to create kind of conservatories and decks. And so that's a little adventure we've been having down the road in Deptford, looking at restoring 64 and 66 Deptford High Street. Okay. Let me come. Okay, so that's butcher shop number 2. I'm conscious of the time here. So butcher shop number 3 is going to happen a bit faster, but the story is not quite so intense there, but interesting, I hope, comrades, nonetheless. So us Peckham folk have been enjoying the pedestrianized Rye Lane through the pandemic. And it's been really great and healthy and fresh air on Rye Lane. I'm a big fan of it being pedestrianized. And there, my good friend and collaborator, Akbar Khan, has been doing some work on some of his entrepreneurial kind of journeys. And as you'll see, he's become a kind of heroic restorer of buildings. This was the project that Khan led 5 years ago to open up the 1,000 glass lenses to Khan's. And he's turned his attention this last year during the pandemic to 100 Rye Lane, which is opposite Khan's. And it was a butcher shop. So this butcher shop number 3 has had a little journey recently. And so it's this stretch of the lane just opposite the opposite Khan's, in this case on the west side of the street. And here is us kind of getting in and encountering or peeling away a modern halal butcher shop and trying to find what traces of a historic building that we could find within. And so the not very nice suspended ceiling was removed, and another suspended ceiling was removed, as we typically find them layered over each other, to reveal a really tall space. And so here you can see when they just reopened, it's now called Peckham Organics. It's kind of premium Khan's where they have organic stuff. And you can see what we've done. We've removed the ceiling, gone right back up to the Victorian or Edwardian shop kind of level. The host building is, I think, early 19th century, reworked a little bit, but there's some definite mid-19th century fireplaces inside. And we revealed this paneling on the north side of the room and this fantastic tile work beneath, which I'll show you in a moment. And I'm persuaded Akbar and the gang to use hopefully kind of tasteful colors, calling out the sort of geometry and the architecture of the ceiling and various archaeological things we found there. And there you can see there's this beautiful embossed tile work, obviously from the late 19th or early 20th century, surviving quite well. This is now a part of Khan's garden center, which some of you all will have been shopping at. It's turning out to be a great success. But this was, of course, the early days when I took these pictures pretty much the day it opened. It's now pretty well populated. And we've been making some signs, which some of you all will have begun to notice during the pandemic or currently on Rye Lane. We found this, so here's the new sign that we made for 100 Rye Lane, this butcher shop number 3, with hopefully kind of cheerful colors and hopefully slightly uplifting descriptions of what's in the shops. And there's characteristic of the kind of lively mix of things on Rye Lane. You can see there's a hairdresser's that's neatly been sort of put into the side there. And then the emergent, Akbar's emergent garden center there. And the latest thing that we did last weekend, or I think it was last weekend or a couple of days ago, was to decorate the new fruit bar that some opened within the last week or so at Khan's. And here we can see Ansar, the Pakistani letter writer who I really love working with. And so here he's put some new lettering on this new fruit juice shop. And I think this is the first Farsi lettering that's been hand painted on Rye Lane, possibly ever. And so I was quite keen that because there's such a lively and populous Afghan community on Rye Lane, that some Farsi made it into the streetscape. And there you can see the big new sign that we made for Khan's last winter, using Art Deco kind of letter forms to begin to slowly reinvest the Art Deco-ness of Khan's bargains, the former Holdrens. And you can see the amazing tin fluting from the original 1935 facade that was revealed when Khan removed the huge blue sign that used to be there. And so it's been really exciting to see the amount of archaeology surviving from the old 30s shop front once the blue sign was removed. And there's me on my birthday last week, painting in some of the lost tiles to make a more even kind of feel to the background of the new tin letters that Faraz made for us for Khan's. And there, the little square that some of you will have noticed on the north tower of Khan's that shows the old faience tile work behind, which hoping to see more of that in the coming months. Okay, so we're getting to the end of the talk. We're up to butcher shop number 4 of our 4 butcher shop now. And we're back on Rye, a bit further south on Rye Lane. And this image here is of number 211 Rye Lane and 213 Rye Lane, 2 premises bought up by the Lobo seafood butchering family in, I guess, bought in the 1990s or 2000s. And the site that I'm going to tell you about finally in our talk today is this site on the left-hand side that has the single-story halal butcher shop on it and the gap, basically. So this building that we've designed, this is a new building entirely. There was really nothing there except for a kind of shop front and a few coolers and a not very good roof. And so in this case, we've got planning consent for building a new building. And I thought it would be amusing to debut this building with you all this evening. And it's inspired hugely by two of my favorite buildings on Rye Lane, and that's 112 and 114 Rye Lane. Now, these are buildings from the Edwardian or interwar period, the first decades of the 20th century. And it's a kind of a very London sort of architecture, which I've always loved. Again, very picturesque. In this case, reviving Renaissance architecture in a quite a playful sort of way. Here we can see, of course, the truncated tower cinema on the left-hand side with the entrance to the Schumett car park, where there, of course, was this great cinema in the early 20th century. And I reckon in either about 1915 or 1920, these two buildings were built, and they have these pretty gables. This lovely kind of Dutch gable to the left at 114, and this wonderful round gable to the right at 112 Rye Lane. It was once Upson's shoe shop, and we can see there used to be a fabulous flagpole there. So I'm hoping that gets put back. It sounds like a good cleaner, greener, safer application for next year's round to put the flagpole back there. So these are really cool Edwardian buildings on Rye Lane. Here photographed a little bit closer up a couple of days ago for this talk. Now, these buildings are part of a family of buildings in London that we call the Edwardian Free Renaissance style. Quite a mouthful, but really seductive architecture. And this is another example of that sort of architecture in the West End. This is on Daring Street, just opposite, just off Oxford Street near John Lewis in Oxford Circus. And this is by an amazing architecture firm called Treadwell and Martin. And they specialized in taking the narrow footprint of a Georgian house or early 19th century house and extending it, building it back, basically doubling or tripling the amount of square footage on the site by going up and going back and creating workspaces or residential spaces above the all-important shop. And so Treadwell and Martin have built about 10 of these in the West End. They're absolutely amazing. And they also flirt with the Art Nouveau, which you can kind of see in these buildings here, sort of flirting with the Art Nouveau in this sort of wonderful, fluid sort of lines with lovely kind of curving forms in that Dutch gable there. And so these have been brought to life to me by a really super book, another great book on London's architecture called Edwardian Architecture, a Biographical Dictionary by A. Stuart Gray that really tells you where to go and find all these buildings. This is another one on Whitehall called the Old Shades by Treadwell and Martin with this truly Art Nouveau kind of crazy gable. It's as close as English architecture gets to the Art Nouveau in the first decades of the 20th century. One antecedent for this architecture is the work from the aesthetic movement. And this is a house by E.W. Godwin on Tite Street from about 1865, 1870. And there you can see the kind of swept gable and the kind of, in this case, brilliant asymmetry of this artist studio in Chelsea. Another great practitioner in this Edwardian freestyle is H. Fuller Clark, and we can see his building on Riding House Street in Fitzrovia using polychrome brickwork and stone dressing and these lovely kind of spade motifs, another characteristic motif from this period. This is a group of houses and a plumbing merchant on Riding Horse Street. It's a absolutely incredible group of houses that's thankfully listed, and by a not very well known, but for my money, brilliant architect, H. Fuller Clark. And of course, on a much larger scale, this Edwardian freestyle can be seen in buildings like the big Hotel Russell in Russell Square, which is by Fitzroy Doll and makes extensive use of glazed terracotta or faience. Just like Cannes on Rye Lane is all clad in faience. So here's our project. We didn't have the budget to do this fabulous Treadwell and Martin kind of architecture, but I looked for a way, you all, to sneak in some kind of architecture onto the lane that's inspired by this period that I love so much. And I think when you work as an architect, you want to try things that you love. And so the idea here was to take inspiration from these amazing Edwardian buildings and see if we could build something. And so the plan is cranked and expands to the back. It's quite narrow where it meets Rye Lane, and then it flares out a bit. But because of the rights of light to this old building here at 209 Rye Lane, just to the north, we had to have this curious step plan form to make sure we had really good daylighting to these rooms. I have a feeling this site will get redeveloped in the fullness of time, but we've been decorous, and so the building kind of tears down to meet that. And so I guess I feel this is my opportunity to do a Treadwell Martin-like thing. It's the same brief, essentially, to get as much square meterage and as much accommodation on the site, but do it in such a way, I think, well, I'm obviously really interested in boosting the architecture of Rye Lane. And so what we've come up with is there's the sectional form. It's basically 3 flats sitting on top of quite a tall shop unit. And the back is quite different, as you can see from this color drawing we've made. We've made it stripy on the back and quite light at the back to get as much daylight float to percolate down into the streets. What's right behind it is the new Peckham Palms, where they've moved the hairdressers and restaurants and things from around the station square to facilitate the station square. And so I was very conscious when we designed this thing that it should have 2 fronts. It should have a front that kind of meets Rye Lane, but also should have quite a cheerful back that meets the Bournemouth Close, the Peckham Palms. And as I found in the years we've been working on this, they've built tons of flats in the back of all of these properties in this stretch of Rye Lane between basically Bournemouth Road down to the end of the lane. So here you can see the building becoming this winter, and we've chosen some quite bright bricks again to kind of get the light floating around. And we've used stripes. Why stripes? To try to make it cheerful and lively. And here you can see quite emphatic stripes facing north, inspired hugely by the great Westminster Catholic Cathedral, where coincidentally Boris Johnson was married last week. How about that? This is one of my favorite buildings, not only in London, but the whole world. It is by the great John Francis Bentley and is a tour de force of architecture on the threshold of the historic period and the modern period. I mean, this is partially a steel frame building. It's got these, well, you must all know it. It's amazing. The interior is incredible, but the outside is one of the greatest examples of polychrome brick and stonework in the country. It's fantastic. It's designed in the Byzantine style by the great Catholic, the architect of the Catholic Church, John Francis Bentley. And I never tire of going to visit this building. So in a much more modest way, we've done stripes, trying to enliven Bournemouth Close and the townscape around there. Why not? The bricks are the same price. You can do things with bricks. And that's, we're not working, none of these projects that I'm showing you have budgets to speak of at all. And so one's always looking for ways to kind of bring life and vitality into the project without cost neutral in a way. And so here we've used 6 different types of brick on this project. And we can see this idea of the swept gable at the top, red rubber bricks, which really haven't entirely turned out right, but I think, as I'll show you, they haven't done too bad. And then this roof form that you all will know that I love, if you've ever walked down Shumert Grove and seen the Peckham Mosque. I'm crazy about barrel vaulted roofs, and so that happened here. Whoops, wrong way. And so another inspiration for this is the swept forms of that lovely bathhouse in New Cross that's recently been turned to an annex of the Goldsmiths School of Art. It's just a fragment of an amazing building just down the road from us in Peckham with these lovely swept forms. And here are my sketches trying to kind of figure out what the geometry might be like. And here is it on site, which is, this picture was taken a couple of weeks ago, showing the emergent kind of curved shape, both of the gable, the parapet that meets Rye Lane, and the steel shape and the timber structure of the barrel vaulted roof. We're trying to use up all the last bricks on the site. So here's me trying to persuade the bricklayers to have stripes on the inside of the little balcony at the top, using up the last of the blue glazed bricks. And there you can see some pictures in the last couple of weeks showing what I hope will be a nice flat at the top of the building with these, I think, quite powerful curved roof forms given geometric interest because of the crank nature of the site. So it's broken into 3 different roof sections. And I think it'll be, well, we hope, a fabulous flat. It's here is a kind of effort to do something with tiles to the front elevation, to have a different grain, not just a brick facade, but to use tiles as a kind of keystone motif. There you can see the kind of intention of the elevation. Here goes the Albanian bricklayers doing their very best effort in pulling this all together. And then finally, for the lower part of the building, where there'll be a shop frontage, here you can see the glazed bricks that we've put in, which should be really robust, graffiti kind of resistant, and hopefully eye-catching part of the south end of Rye Lane. And in the course of the construction process, we found this amazing system in the backyard, which must have been characteristic of houses in Peckham in the 18th and 19th centuries, that they stored water in cisterns. And so this beautifully formed kind of brick vessel, here I stuck my iPhone in and took a picture of the inside. I've heard that you find these when you're doing this sort of work. And so very pleased to document that. And here a selection of the clay tiles and clay pipes and things that we found during the foundation work. And we thought to make a time capsule to bury in the foundation. And so here we're put the latest issue of the Peckham Peculiar and the Peckham Society magazine, some of the pottery shards we found, into a time capsule that's now buried in the foundation. And then finally, we've got planning consent for a couple more of these narrow buildings on the high street. The church on the left is being built right now quite slowly. So that's kind of the story. The last thing that I wanted just to leave with you before concluding this talk is another sort of strand to our pandemic year in the studio has been working on the fire station in Plumstead, a wonderful 1906 LCC Renaissance Revival fire station, which has this lovely lettering on it in Dalton's Carrara ware. And as you can tell from the talk this evening, I'm really interested in lettering in buildings. And so we've persuaded the fire brigade, who are building a new annex to the east of the site, we basically designed the front of this new annex with a link. And we're proposing to have Dalt glazed ceramic lettering on the front. And so this has been a great journey, learning about fire station architecture, trying to figure out how to connect a new building to a lovely grade 2 listed historic building, and to once again revive aspects of craftsmanship and decoration that I find in the Edwardian architecture that I love so much. And why not perpetuate this stuff? So we've got we're on the threshold, we think, of getting planning consent for a stone cartouche and ceramic lettering. And you can see the sort of basically slightly Wren-inspired windows that we've been working on. And then finally, we've been working with Adam Brown, Land Alton Brown and Network Rail on Peckham Rise Station. You all will be seeing these images coming through, us Peckham folk. This is, and we've been helping with historic building things, looking at how this new building may join up with, and where the restoration opportunities are on the station, which I think are quite considerable as they refashion the station to work better with lifts and stairs. And then strangely, we've been working on a war memorial, National Muslim War Memorial in the National Arboretum in Staffordshire. So really quite a unexpected last year of work, but it's really a joy for me to give you a preview of our project at 211 Rye Lane. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, Benny.
My pleasure.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. That was fantastic, Benny. Okay, we're just going to throw it open now. Anyone got any questions for Benny or just about any aspect of that?
I've got one.
Oh, go ahead.
The timbers, is there a certain type of wood such as oak, and is it for the timber frame buildings, and is it specially treated, or just, I can imagine it's sort of rotten or whatever?
Oh, excellent question. I wish I knew more about this. I need to learn. I couldn't tell you what material the timber is. It seems to be pretty dry. It survived the fire, saved by the plaster lining of the rooms. And so sort of post-fire, the plaster is kind of dropped off. It's a mixture of different timbers. The flank walls are definitely original. The first floor was raised in 1900 when the shop was introduced, and that's definitely modern timber. And the roof clearly was rebuilt in about 1920. And so the way that you can obviously tell is some of the stuff is hand cut and some of the stuff is cut by sawmills. And so Peckham was famous for sawmills and timber, but I guess in the early 18th century, not so, certainly long before the construction of the Surrey Canal. And so I think it's diverse timbers. Some of the sections are round, not very big. Some are squared off, and several of them have marks in them suggesting they were tooled, recycled from another building. That's all I can tell you, but I think it's sound and it's certainly self-supporting, but now we've introduced a steel kind of cage inside or frame. Hopefully the new floors are all supported on a modern frame. What's been so exciting though is to see all the hand tooling, which obviously speaks of vernacular pre-industrial building techniques.
Oh, was that Clyde? I think Clyde has a question. Clyde, you need to unmute.
Okay, right. Yes, you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Benny, first of all, fantastic talk. The forensic architectural archaeology that goes into this is really quite astounding. But at the other end of the spectrum, do you have difficulties with persuading building control that what you want to do still complies with, is still commensurate with modern building regulation values, or are they usually?
We're meeting that discussion right now. Well, obviously the one in Deptford hasn't happened yet, so that can be but there's no question that the frame in 62 Peckham High Street is a wonderful thing. I think we're okay on preserving it or showing it on the west wall because there's another inhabited building next door, so I don't think there's going to be heat loss on that side. But I'm worried, of course, about the east side where there's the flattened brick wall from the 1920s. Don't know, have to get back to you on that. But I think it's worth trying to fight for seeing this incredible frame on the inside of the building. But the roof has been thoroughly insulated, but yeah, there's quite some work to do still on that.
Okay, thanks, Benny.
Sam.
Hey, sorry, hi, thank you. I was fascinated by the whole concept of removing the stairs. I have been an architecture fan, especially in the 80s, for a long time in Peckham, and I see these upstairs rooms, like windows, and I'm always really sad in. And now I understand why, and that had never occurred to me before. Given the shortage of inner city housing provision at the moment, is there no incentive to reinstate those staircases and turn these back into affordable housing that people can use, and perhaps perhaps the shopkeepers can be offered some incentive to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sam. They're mostly in private hands. And I think some of the kind of idea about the THI project that we've all been helping with is just about that. And Julie, can you tell us, is that been a part of the THI scheme?
Hello. Hi. Well, in the early days of discussions about 62, there was a conversation within Southwark about whether or not a residential unit above 62 might be something that those responsible for looking at building affordable housing would be interested in. But I think because it was one unit, there's not a return on it. Southwark needs to kind of concentrate on where there's a scale of return, really, and so it wasn't something that was that could be made to happen with this particular building. But it is something that was looked at and considered, but on that instance, it wasn't possible. There are others. Yeah, we're looking at 100 Peckham High Street as well, but I think Benny said it depends on who owns the buildings. The freeholder of that building decided against making a residential scheme of the upper floors. So, and you know, there's no way of telling them that that's what they have to do. So yeah, but I think
made a condition of planning consent.
Well, I think we're going to try to get a flat up there now, and that our project for 62 is in for planning now. It's one of the characteristics of shops since time immemorial, since Roman times. Everybody wanted shop frontage, and so the value is all in the shop front side of the site, and so they're very long but quite narrow. And when you take a meter off of that shop to create a stair up to the flat, it's quite hard to plan the shops. And so in a way, Sam, it's almost as if a bunch of shops need to get together and say, well, you're going to have the passage, and then the passage goes back and could serve, 3 or 4 of them. And I actually think there's an opportunity at 58 and 60 Peckham High Street, which is very wide. And I think we all know that building is undergoing a change now. And I think we should continue to advocate to get flats up there. That, and one of them is of course listed. Yeah, so yeah, more questions? I must say how pleased I am to see so many dear friends here. It's really exciting to see you guys, and really fun to share what we've been obsessing about with you.
I think Georgina wants to ask a question. Georgina, you need to unmute yourself.
Hi, I was just waving at Benny. Actually, I haven't got a question, but it was a wonderful talk, and it's absolutely fascinating and I've lived in Peckham for over 25 years, but you know, this really takes you down into the fabric of the place, which is great. So thank you.
Great to see you, Georgina.
Hi, Benny.
John Turpin.
Hello. Hello, Benny. Thank you. That was brilliant. I'm sort of almost overwhelmed by the story of the 1820 aquatint of the terrace, which was found in Australia. I think that is such an extraordinary story and needs developing, perhaps, you know. Who were these people who took it out there? Were they Peckhamites? Were they early Peckhamites? Were they jailbirds?
Derek Kinraid's written an article about it. Is Derek on this call somewhere? Hopefully. The legendary Derek Kinraid.
Derek is there, yeah.
Derek, yeah, and Derek doesn't really remember. It was, let's pay credit to John Beasley, because he was the one who recognised where it was, simply because on the east side you can recognise the windows of the Hanover Chapel. And yeah, it is a remarkable story. And yeah, and Benny, I don't know how you do it. It's just astonishing. You reveal aspects of architecture and particularly in Peckham, which are wonderful and make us proud of the place. Well done.
Well, as do you, Derek. Your contribution is immense to our love of Peckham, which I'll always be grateful for, Derek. I also...
I've got another question from Leslie Ann Davis. Sorry to interrupt, Benny, about cans.
Leslie.
Is that working? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, Leslie, could you introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry, hello. I'm Leslie. Thank you for letting me join the Peckham Restoration Society. I'm Benny's cousin. And I had a lovely preview about the talk on Sunday, in fact. I saw him. But I'd like to, I know some of the projects that Ben has been involved with, but I'd particularly like to ask a question about the Cairns project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm interested in the fact that the way I wanted to know about the arched with the lights coming through. To me, it looks like what it's borrowed light, obviously, but it also is reminiscent of Islamic Turkish bath, where the lights came into the frame. And it's interesting that it's probably got the same community. Maybe they wanted to introduce that back into the building themselves because of that. Was that relevant? Is what I'm asking.
Yeah, excellent question, Cuz.
Hi there.
The lenses are amazing. There are 1,000 of them, and Khan's people, the local handymen, cleaned each one of them. What's up is it's basically pavement lights, and it was quite popular in the Art Deco period. And probably the other spectacular example of what's called lenscrete is the Eltham Palace, where the Courtauld family built a fabulous kind of reception area with the dome of those same glass lenses.
Yes.
And so it was one of these innovative materials that were being marketed in the 1920s and 30s. And what we found, the same archaeology that we're finding in these old shops and things, we found at Khan's, or the former Holdrens. We found that it had the crittle windows, it had a really interesting concrete structural system. It had the top shop front manufacturers, it had Leeds fire clay faience, it has the lenscrete. And so that department store was using the latest materials all around the building. And what it was designed for, Leslie, was to bring daylight into the deep plan of a department store. Department stores characteristically have very deep plans. And so you need to introduce ventilation and daylight in the middle of the plan. And so that vault is kind of halfway down the length of the store. And so it was a great discovery. And so what's consistent with all of these projects that I've showed you today is that if once you start peeling away all those modern finishes, you just find all this stuff basically. And it's one of the really interesting things about doing architecture in Peckham is finding things and kind of putting the narrative together along with Derek and John Beasley, who are telling us about the history of these sites. And I also have to thank my mum, who's sitting beside me here, who's an art historian. And so all this history business comes from mum, basically. I'm a chip off the old block here. This is what our family does. And so when you bring that kind of spirit to architecture, you get a talk like tonight's talk, basically.
Thank you. Great talk, really.
Can I ask a question if no one else has? I want to ask you about the builders you work with, Benny. Because I think sometimes, you know, you've got ideas as an architect that you want, but somebody else usually has to build them.
Yeah.
And do you find yourself just having conversations and kind of adapting what you want to happen with the resources that are on offer and the skills that the builders have, that you sort of have to have a kind of fluid process of discussion with an invention with the builders?
Well, that's a really good question, Claire. What's so different from the work that we're doing and the work that the THI are doing is it's really improvised. And the only way I get the stuff I want is by hanging out on site a good deal and being a cheerleader, giving pep talks and saying, and trying to say, well, actually, isn't it more interesting if we do it this way? Or they're like, why do you want to do that? And I was like, well, and then also, of course, using the architecture of Peckham, where there are these fabulous examples of Edwardian buildings, and saying to, say, a bricklayer, well, why can't you do that? I mean, and they're like, I don't want to do that. Oh, I can't do that. And so trying to, as you say, find some common ground, and just trying to, well, to work on my Spanish so I can communicate in Spanish with the folk, and to draw a lot and just to show how things could be. I'm not, sadly, in the position where people do what I draw and what I say. We draw stuff. You can see we love to draw. Then I have to go on site and plead, basically, or a fair bit of that's going on. I hope one day to get commissions where stuff happens in a more easy way, but at the moment it's still pretty difficult. But Akbar is great because he really kind of gets it and is putting energy into doing things. And I like to be by his side to, if he needs some new signage, let's design a sign. And I don't charge him to do that. We thought, well, you know, it'll brighten up Rye Lane, let's make a sign. It's, of course, the payment is it's fun. And you kind of watch things happen. And so that's the payment. It's not easy. It's not terribly easy, but it might get easier. I don't know. I hope.
No, thank you. I mean, I just think it's such an interesting idea, this idea that the sense of craft and human touch and human interaction, and that, you know, these buildings you're describing aren't industrialized. They're not sort of prefabricated. They're about things that are made on site with what's available. And it's such an interesting and kind of crucial idea. Yeah, thanks.
I mean, I'm so impressed, Claire, with what you and your studio do. And we're so grateful for you to be a part of our community here in Peckham, Claire, massively. I feel the work that I've been showing you this evening is sort of a poor man's conservation practice, basically. We kind of get the same principles that we all kind of adhere to in the world of conservation, but I'm kind of doing it with folk that don't know about all that sort of stuff so much. And trying to kind of get somewhere with a bit of enthusiasm rather than people kind of all going into it with their eyes wide open in a way.
Mm. Well, bravo. Any more questions? Sorry, it's
Claire,
right.
Claire, yes, I've
Yes.
got one very quick, it's Eileen here. Sorry, you can't see me moving around. I've just got a suggestion. Could we take the point that's just come up that Benny's talking about? It hadn't occurred to me before about how to help owners of properties understand the conservation. I imagine that what you're referring to, Benny, is that some architects, conservation architects, are working with people who've already got the point and they're commissioning the work themselves. And what you're doing is actually taking these ideas to people who haven't got a clue about conservation or they're amateurs at it. I'd like to suggest that we take that into the PHRP and have a discussion, because I think there may be potentially a legacy project there that we could seek funding for, that we could at least pilot some things on that aspect.
I think so. And I think we have good networks, as you know, Eileen, in Peckham. And so, and Khan is well connected. So I've got to know various craftsmen and other folk shop owners through him. And so something's happening, it's building up, but it could use some more nurturing perhaps.
Yeah, well, is that all right, Claire? Can we put it on the agenda for the next meeting?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, totally. Yeah. Yeah. Very, very enthusiastic about that. We've got a minute left. Oh, Michelle.
Tick, tick, tick.
Sorry,
tick.
I just to echo what Eileen said, I think we mentioned in our last meeting about that as one of the legacy suggestions. Apart from the schools project, was builders, to educate the builders about the conservation and lime mortar and linseed oil paints, all these things that preserve the merits of
Michelle,
particular.
I'm going to ask you to develop that into a talk for the autumn.
Oh, great. Thanks.
What the issues might be, no, well, what the bigger picture might be, what we might discuss, and what, you know, what the challenges are and what the opportunities are.
It'd be good to get builders to these talks and not, you know, not just the residents, although we really appreciate the residents. It'd be great to get the tradesmen on board. Yeah, definitely. And does anyone know, I've put it in the chat, if Rakib Shaw still lives at the sausage factory, because I thought he'd moved.
Anybody know? No.
Benny?
Okay, well, look, sorry, I'm going to be a bit strict about time. It's 8:30 now. I think we should just give Benny a massive round of applause. Yay! Electronic.
Yeah, well, let's hope we all get together. I can do a walking tour version of this at some point for our group. And so nice to see lots of friends. I miss you all, but I expect you know where to find me, lurking around Rye Lane.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Benny, and nice to meet your mum and your cousin. Actually, do you all want to meet my daughter? My daughter's sitting listening. Say hello.
Hello, Claire's daughter.
No, thank you very much, Benny. That was fantastic. And we'll let everyone know when it's posted on our website so that you can all watch it again and think about the ideas. And thanks everyone for coming, and great to meet the new people who've come tonight, and hopefully you'll stay on our mailing list and keep in touch. So thank you
very much, Claire.
Great, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.